Emma Turner stood in the middle of her kitchen, staring up at the ceiling as the last flicker of the overhead light died out. For a second, she hoped it might come back on the way it sometimes did, one more little spark. One more sign that things still worked the way they should. But the bulb stayed dead, leaving the room dim, quiet, and colder than it had been moments earlier. Emma let out a long sigh and rubbed her forehead. It wasn't just the light. It felt like everything around her was breaking in small, frustrating ways. Her husband, Daniel, had promised 3 times this week that he would fix it. He'd even stood on the same chair, looked at the same light and said, "I'll take care of it tonight. Don't worry." But the nights kept passing, and the light kept buzzing, flickering, then finally surrendering altogether. And Emma, who worked from home, cooked at home, kept the house in order, was the one left standing underneath it. Trying not to feel ignored, she reached for her phone and called Daniel, hoping he might be on his way home early for once. When he finally answered, his voice sounded rushed and distracted. "What's up? Everything okay?" "The kitchen light went out again," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's completely dead now." There was a short pause, then a sigh heavy with exhaustion. "Emma, I'm still at work. I don't know when I'll get home. Maybe call someone. Or wait until tomorrow. I can't deal with this right now." The disappointment hit her harder than she expected. "Okay," she whispered. "I understand." Before she could say anything else, he ended the call. Emma stared at the blank screen, telling herself not to take it personally. Work was stressful for him. He had deadlines, meetings, responsibilities. But she had responsibilities too. And she was tired of feeling like everything inside their home fell on her shoulders. She put the phone down and stepped back, letting the dim evening light from the window fill the kitchen. The room felt bigger than usual, emptier too. She thought about grabbing a ladder and trying to fix the light herself, but she knew nothing about wiring. And the last thing she needed was to shock herself on a Friday night. She was about to pull out frozen pizza for dinner when she heard a gentle knock on the front door. Confused, she wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. On the porch stood Mark Lawson, one of Daniel's closest friends. He lived just 2 streets away and often came by during football season. Sometimes with fast food in his hands, sometimes with Daniel's old fishing gear he had borrowed. But Emma had never seen him standing on her porch on a quiet evening like this. Mark held a small toolbox in one hand and gave her an easy smile. "Hey, Emma. Daniel told me your kitchen light finally gave up. Thought I'd swing by and check it out." Emma blinked, surprised. "He told you?" "Yeah. He texted me. Said he didn't want it sitting broken all weekend." She wasn't sure if that was true or if Daniel had felt guilty after hanging up. Either way, help had arrived. And she wasn't in the mood to question it. "That's really kind of you," she said, stepping aside so he could enter. "Thank you for coming." "No problem," Mark replied as he walked inside. "I was home anyway. Figured it would take me 10 minutes. Emma led him to the kitchen, wondering why his presence made the house feel less suffocating. Mark wasn't loud or overly friendly. He had a calm way about him, steady, thoughtful, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. She watched him drag the stool under the broken light and climb up with ease. He unscrewed the dead bulb, checked the wiring with practiced movements, and pulled out a small tester light from his toolbox. "Ah," he murmured. "Loose connection. Happens all the time in older houses." Emma leaned on the counter, watching him work. "I guess I should have called someone instead of waiting for days." Mark chuckled softly. "Most people wait. It's not exactly an emergency." "No," Emma said quietly, "but it's been annoying." Her words carried more weight than she meant, and Mark glanced down at her from the stool. His eyes were warm, curious, not judging, just noticing. Emma looked away, hoping he couldn't read the tiredness she felt. He tightened the wires, reattached the fixture, and carefully twisted in a fresh bulb. He stepped off the stool and nodded toward the switch. "Want to test it?" Emma flicked it on. The kitchen filled with warm, steady lights, soft enough to feel comforting, but bright enough to chase away the loneliness that had been building inside her all day. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Wow, that's a lot better. Told you it was simple, Mark said with a small smile. But as Emma turned toward him, she realized the kitchen didn't feel cold anymore. It felt alive, warm, safe. And for a moment she felt something she didn't expect, a small spark of gratitude that went deeper than just a fixed light. Really? She said softly. Thank you, Mark. I mean it, he shrugged. But his eyes softened. Any time. The word hung in the air in a way neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. Emma tried to shake off this strange warmth blooming in her chest. It was just the relief of finally having something in her house working again. That's all. But when she reached for her phone to text Daniel about the repair, the screen lit up with a message already waiting. Daniel, working late again. Don't wait up tonight. Emma stared at the message. Something inside her tightened, not anger, not sadness, just a quiet ache she didn't have words for. She put the phone down and glanced at Mark again. He looked at her with a calm expression. But there was something else. There's something unspoken, something almost protective. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen light hummed softly above them. It was warm, it was steady, and it had already changed more than just the room. Emma knew this evening wasn't just about a broken bulb. Something inside her had shifted. Even if she didn't understand it yet, she just didn't know this was the beginning of everything. The kitchen still felt warmer than usual the next morning, as if the new light bulb had changed more than just the brightness in the room. Emma Turner woke up thinking about how icily Mark had fixed it, how calm he had been, how he had listened when she didn't even realize she was speaking from a place of loneliness. She wasn't used to someone paying that kind of attention. She wasn't used to feeling seen. She made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the golden glow above her. It looked perfect, now steady and comforting. But instead of easing her mind, it made her wonder why a simple moment with Mark had felt so significant. She didn't want to think too deeply about it. She reminded herself that he was just being kind, nothing more. Life didn't change because someone fixed a light. But the truth was, the light had turned on something inside her she hadn't felt in a long time by afternoon. The sky in Seattle had turned gray, and rain tapped softly against the windows. Emma worked on her laptop, trying to focus on a project that needed finishing. But every few minutes, her thoughts drifted back to the night before Mark standing on the stool. The warm smile he gave her, the way he asked if she was okay without making her feel small. Around 4 p.m., she heard a light knock on the door. When she opened it, Mark was standing there again, holding a small brown paper bag. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was out getting supplies from the hardware store. Got an extra set of bulbs. Thought you might need them just in case." Emma blinked, surprised yet strangely relieved to see him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied with a small shrug. "Just figured it might help." She stepped aside. "Come in. It's cold out there." He walked into the kitchen and placed the bag on the counter. "This old house probably has a few more loose connections. At least now you'll be prepared." Emma smiled, even though her heart felt heavier than she wanted to admit. "I appreciate it." He glanced up at the glowing kitchen light. "Still working. Still perfect," she said. "Thanks to you." Mark nodded, then leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you looked really stressed last night. Everything all right?" Emma hesitated. She didn't want to complain. She didn't want to sound dramatic. But his voice was gentle, patient-like. He had time for whatever she needed to say. Just, "Life lately," she finally said. "Daniel's been buried in work. I feel like we barely talk anymore." Mark looked down at his hands. "Yeah, I've noticed he's been distant. Even with me." The honesty in his tone surprised her. She had never heard anyone admit that out loud. She pressed her lips together and stared at the countertop. "I don't want to make it sound like my marriage is falling apart," she whispered. "But I feel alone, even when he's home." Mark didn't respond at first. He wasn't the type to offer quick answers. Instead, he studied her face like he was trying to understand the kind of hurt she was carrying. "You deserve better than feeling alone," said finally. "You really do." The words were simple, but they struck a deep place inside her. She tried to swallow the sudden lump in her throat, but her voice cracked slightly when she answered. I don't think Daniel means to make me feel this way. I just think he stopped noticing the small things. Mark nodded slowly. Those small things are the important ones. The room felt still, as if the air itself was listening. Emma felt exposed, but also strangely comforted. She wasn't used to someone giving her this kind of understanding. Not rushed, not distracted, not half listening. Mark reached for the light switch, flicked it off, then on again as if checking his work. The warm glow filled the room once more. He looked at it, then at her. Funny, isn't it? He said. How a light can change the whole mood of a room. Emma let out a soft breath. It changed my whole night. Their eyes met just for a heartbeat, but it was enough to send a strange flutter through her chest. She looked away quickly, feeling guilty for noticing something she shouldn't. But Mark didn't look away. His gaze stayed steady, kind, and full of something she wasn't ready to name. He broke the silence gently. Emma, if you ever need anything, really anything, just call me. I don't care if it's a broken light or a heavy day. I'm right down the street. Her breath caught. Not because his offer was inappropriate, but because it was sincere. Someone offering to be there for her without turning it into a burden felt unfamiliar. Thank you, she said quietly. I mean it. Before either of them could speak again, her phone buzzed loudly on the counter. She glanced at the screen. Daniel, traffic is bad. Might stay late again. Don't wait for dinner. The message felt like a cold wind brushing past her warm skin. She didn't want Mark to see the disappointment in her eyes, but his expression told her he already had. He looked at her with a softness that made her chest ache, not pity, but something closer to concern, something deeper. He set the bag of bulbs on the counter and picked up his toolbox. I'll get out of your hair, he said quietly. But don't forget what I said. Emma nodded. I won't. As he walked to the door, Emma felt a strange pull inside her, something warm, something dangerous, something she hadn't felt in years. When he stepped outside, the rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, echoing through the silent house. She closed the door gently behind him and leaned her forehead against it. The kitchen light glowed softly behind her, casting shadows on the floor. It was just a bulb. It was just a moment. It was just a friend helping her out. But somehow, everything already felt different. Emma turned around and stared at the warm glow above her. She felt the change settling quietly in her heart. The same way light spreads gently across a dark room, slow, steady, impossible to ignore. She didn't know where the next moment would take her, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Last night, the light had turned on. And today, something inside her had turned on too. The following weeks moved quietly. But something in Emma's life shifted in ways she couldn't deny. The kitchen light that Mark had fixed became the warmest spot in the house up. Little reminder that someone had shown up when she needed help most. She didn't plan for her thoughts to drift back to that moment, but they did. Especially on nights when Daniel worked late again and again. Her marriage hadn't broken, but it had weakened in small ways she couldn't explain aloud. Silence filled the spaces where conversation used to live. Tired apologies replaced laughter. And there were too many evenings when she ate dinner alone at the kitchen table, the warm light glowing above her like a quiet witness. She didn't tell Mark any of this, but somehow he always seemed to know when she was struggling. One afternoon, heavy clouds covered the Seattle sky, and a sudden burst of rain drenched the neighborhood. Emma had just finished her work and stepped onto the porch to bring in a package when she slipped slightly on the wet wood. Before she could fall, a steady hand caught her arm. She looked up and there was Mark. He had been walking past with his jacket hood up, rain dripping down the sides of his face. You okay? He asked, holding her steady. Her heart thumped at the surprise and the closeness. Yeah, she said, breathless. Just didn't see the puddle. He didn't let go of her arm right away. His fingers weren't gripping too tightly, but the touch felt grounding, safe. as if he could sense she needed a moment to find her balance, not just physically, but emotionally. When he finally released her, he moved the package inside and wiped rain off the step with his sleeve. "You should put a mat here," he said gently. "Slippery porches are dangerous." "It's on my list," she said. He gave her a knowing look, the kind that said he didn't believe she'd remember. And he was right. Before she could thank him properly, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Daniel, stuck at work again. Might be home late. She didn't sigh this time. She simply stared at the message until her vision blurred a little. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. It was just... Heavy. Mark noticed her shoulders drop. "He's working late again." Emma nodded. "He always is." There was no bitterness in her tone, only tiredness. And somehow that felt even sadder. Mark hesitated, hands in his pockets, rain still falling around him. "You want to sit for a bit?" he asked softly. "I mean, just talk. You look like you need air." She did. More than she wanted to admit, so she stepped back outside, closing the door behind her, and they sat on the porch together. The rain softened into a gentle mist, the air cool enough to calm her heartbeat. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. For a long moment, she just listened to the rain, to her breathing, to the quiet presence beside her. Finally, Emma spoke. "Do you ever feel like you're walking around with weight you can't put down?" Mark looked at her and his expression softened. "Yeah," he said. "More often than people think." She stared at him, surprised. You always seem steady," he laughed gently. "Steady doesn't mean unhurt." Ah, those words sank into her like warm water. She looked at her hands. "I feel like I'm losing Daniel piece by piece. We used to talk about everything. Now it's like we live in two separate worlds." Mark didn't interrupt. He didn't tee off her cliches or advice she didn't ask for. He just listened, which was something she hadn't felt in months, maybe longer. "And the worst part," Emma added quietly, "is that I don't know how to fix it alone." A long silence stretched between them. Mark's jaw tightened, not in frustration, but empathy. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with emotion he tried to hide. "You shouldn't have to fix everything alone." Emma, her breath caught. Something in the way he said her name, soft, careful, full of respect, made her eyes sting. She blinked fast, trying not to cry. A gentle breeze moved through the porch, brushing her hair across her face. Before she could tuck it behind her ear, Mark reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and moved the stray strand aside. His fingers barely touched her skin, but the warmth of the gesture made her heart twist. She didn't pull away. She didn't want to, but then she remembered herself, her marriage, her promises, the life she had built. She leaned back slightly, trying to steady her breathing. Mark immediately dropped his hand, giving her space. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. He nodded, but his expression held a quiet conflict one. He wasn't ready to speak aloud. Emma could see the weight behind his eyes, the way he fought with himself. She knew that imbalance too well. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that second, everything in her chest tightened: fear, longing, loneliness, confusion. She wished she could sort it all out, but her heart felt like tangled wires, and she didn't know where to begin. Just then, the porch light above them flickered. Both looked up at the same time, startled. The flicker was brief, but it reminded her instantly of the night everything began: the broken bulb, the quiet kitchen, the unexpected knock on the door. Mark let out a short breath. "This house really doesn't like lights," he said with a small smile, trying to break the tension. Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe it wants attention, or maybe it's trying to tell you something," he replied before he realized how his words sounded. They both fell silent. Not uncomfortable silence, just heavy, meaningful, unspoken. Emma stood slowly, her legs feeling strange beneath her. "I should go inside," she said softly. Mark rose to his feet too. "Yeah, of course." But before she stepped away, he touched her hand gently, barely a second. Barely a pressure, but enough to stop her breath. Enough to feel like a moment she would remember long after tonight. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "No matter how it feels." She wanted to answer. She wanted to say something back, something honest. Something she wasn't ready to face. But no words came. She walked inside slowly, feeling the warmth of the kitchen light as soon as she crossed the threshold. The rain outside softened to a whisper. Her heart didn't beat too fast, too loudly. Too painfully, she leaned against the counter, closing her eyes, letting the glow wrap around her like a blanket. What was she supposed to do with feelings she never meant to have? How was she supposed to ignore the comfort she found in someone who wasn't her husband? And why did the house feel so different now? Like every room carried a question she wasn't ready to answer. Emma didn't know the answers. Not yet, but she knew one thing. A line had been crossed, not in action, but in emotion, and once crossed, it couldn't be erased. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same again. The next evening, Emma Turner stood in the kitchen, staring at the warm light above her head, her mind spinning. The house felt unusually quiet, too quiet. Daniel still hadn't come home early, and the familiar hum of the city outside only reminded her of how alone she had been during these past few weeks. Every time she thought about the moments she'd shared with Mark, her heart both fluttered and ached. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to question her marriage. But the warmth and honesty Mark brought into her life had opened a door she couldn't close. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Emma wasn't sure if she wanted it to be Daniel or Mark. Either way, she felt her pulse quicken. She opened the door slowly, and standing there was Mark, holding a small envelope in his hand. "Hi, Emma," he said quietly, his eyes scanning her face. There was hesitation in his tone, a softness she hadn't heard before. "I came to return the screwdriver I borrowed, but I thought I should see you before leaving." She stepped aside, letting him enter. The envelope remained in his hand, a small weightless gesture, but to her, it felt significant. "Thanks," she said softly. Unsure why her voice trembled, Mark walked toward the counter, carefully placing the envelope down. He paused and looked at her, his gaze steady but filled with concern. "Emma, did something happen? You look—" He trailed off, unable to find the right word, but his meaning was clear. Emma felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to lie, and she didn't want to cry. She took a deep breath, looking at the glowing kitchen light, the same light that had begun all of this. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered. "I feel invisible in my own home." Mark didn't move closer, but his presence filled the room. He stood silently, giving her the space she needed while showing that he was there, steady, dependable. "You're not invisible to me," he said quietly. His voice carried a sincerity she couldn't ignore. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt seen, truly seen. But just as she wanted to say something more, soft footsteps echoed behind her. Daniel had come home early. He stopped at the doorway, the fatigue of the week showing on his face. His eyes moved between Emma and Mark, confusion and concern battling for dominance. "You two, okay?" he asked, his voice cautious. Emma's throat tightened. She felt a storm of emotions, fear, longing, guilt, and clarity all crashing at once. The moment demanded honesty. No small lies, no avoidance. She inhaled deeply. "We need to talk, Dan. Really talk," she said softly but firmly. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. The words hit him with weight. For months, he had ignored the subtle distance growing between them, and now it stood right in front of him, undeniable. He nodded slowly, the fear of losing her apparent in his expression. Mark understood immediately. He took a careful step back, giving Emma the space she needed to confront the truth of her heart. Before turning to leave, he looked at her with quiet reassurance. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it makes you happy." Emma watched him walk toward the door. Every step he took felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The kitchen light hummed softly above her, casting warm shadows on the walls and floor. A reminder of the first night he had entered her life to fix something as small as a light bulb, but left something far larger in its place. She turned back to Daniel, her heart pounding. She didn't know if she was ready to speak the words she had buried inside. It's the feeling she had begun to understand in Mark's presence. But she knew she owed herself and her marriage this conversation. "I've been feeling alone," she admitted. "I've been trying to hold everything together, but I can't do it alone anymore. We need to fix a sore, figure out what we really want." Daniel's expression softened. He stepped closer, tentative, as if testing the ground. "Emma, I didn't realize." His voice trailed off, caught between apology and confusion. "I've been so focused on work, I didn't notice you needed me. I see now. I've been distant. I didn't mean to hurt you." Emma studied him carefully. His words were true. She could feel it. But she also realized that Mark had shown her a kind of emotional presence she hadn't felt in months. Reminder that connection and understanding could exist outside the walls of her immediate life. She had to choose carefully, not out of desire, but out of truth. Mark's brief presence had illuminated what she had been missing. It wasn't about love or betrayal, it was about being seen, valued, and heard. And now, in this warm kitchen light, Emma understood that whatever path she chose, she needed to face it with honesty. Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand. "I want to try. I want us to try," he said, his eyes pleading. "I don't want to lose you." Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forgive the distance, the late nights, the loneliness. But she also couldn't ignore the quiet truth Mark had revealed: how small gestures, attention and kindness could make her feel alive again. Emma closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the kitchen light and the presence of both men settle in her. She realized she wasn't choosing between two men. She was choosing how she wanted to be treated, how she wanted to feel, and how she wanted her life to move forward. Opening her eyes, she looked at Daniel, her voice calm but firm. "We have a lot to talk about. We need to rebuild. But I need you to really be here. Not just in the same house, but with me." Daniel nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I can do that. I will do that. I promise." Emma felt a small, cautious hope spark in her chest. It wasn't certainty and it wasn't magic, it was the first step toward clarity. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be conversations, adjustments, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that Mark's presence had been a gift. A reminder that she deserved care, attention, and respect in every relationship she held. Mark had left quietly, but the imprint of his kindness lingered. The light he had fixed still glowed softly above, filling the kitchen with a warm, steady glow that mirrored what she hoped to rebuild with Daniel: a marriage based not just on routine, but on attention, care, and shared presence. Emma looked around the kitchen one last time before turning to Daniel. She felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief that the conversation had begun, trepidation that it would demand vulnerability she hadn't used in months. But the kitchen light, steady and warm, reminded her that clarity often comes in small moments, one decision at a time. Daniel took a deep breath, closing the space between them. They stood together under the glow, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tap of rain on the window. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had believed. The choice wasn't easy, and the future wasn't clear. But for the first time in a long time, Emma knew she had the power to shape it, not through anger, resentment, or loneliness, but through honesty, care, and attention to what truly mattered. And as the warm kitchen light hummed softly above, Emma Turner realized that life like light could break, but it could also be repaired. Sometimes a small gesture, a kind presence, or a quiet conversation could illuminate the darkness. And sometimes the light could reveal not just what needed fixing, but what was worth saving. That night, standing under the warm glow, Emma felt something rare, a choice made from clarity and hope. She didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again, and that was okay. The house was quiet. The light was steady, and Emma's heart, though heavy with emotion, was finally awake.